Good morning, patrons. It's time for another episode of, holy shit, I need a haircut. Anyway, we have 3 questions for this month's Q&A video, which is perfect. That's like the perfect amount of questions to answer in a video, so it doesn't get too long, because I tend to get a little bit verbose with some of these answers, especially the more thought-provoking ones. So with that said, let's dive right in with a tough one. So David wants to know, who's your least favorite Marvel character that's been portrayed in a movie? Okay, so at face value, it sounds like what you're asking me is, of all the Marvel characters that have shown up in a movie, which one was my least favorite, in terms of like, which character do I give the least number of shits about? But then it also kind of almost sounded like you were asking instead, which portrayal of a character in a Marvel movie was my least favorite, which is to say I might have like really enjoyed the character in the comics, but not so much enjoyed their silver screen appearance. But I think what you're asking me is the first one, so we're gonna go with I think we'll go with that one, which is basically Marvel character that's shown up in a movie. Which one is my least favorite? But then I think even then we have to get, I want to define this question just a little bit more, because for instance, if we're leaving it open to any Marvel movie, then it would be very easy for me to just kind of like name some shitty side character that one of the X-Men like stuffed into one of their awful movies, and write that off as my least favorite. Jubilee, for instance. Boom, I'm done. So let's narrow it down a little bit more. So let's narrow it down to the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And then even within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there's a question of like, should we restrict it to like main characters, like headliner characters? Because again, you have a lot of side characters that are just kind of in there, and it would be very easy to sort of say like, Nebula is my least favorite, because Nebula is not a character in the comics that I ever, particularly, and not to say that I dislike Nebula, and nor to say that I disliked her portrayal in Guardians of the Galaxy, but I have very neutral feelings on that character as a whole. So I think the question is a little bit more interesting if we stick to headliner characters, which is the main casts of these movies. So with that said, but I guess if I'm looking at the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I had to pick one character that growing up, I connected the least with, and that I was kind of the least excited about. And again, this is not a condemnation of the film, because that's not good. My power just went out. Huh. Oh, there it is. Okay. Where was I? This is not a condemnation of the film at all, because I actually really enjoyed the film. But anyway, I'm rambling. My least favorite would be probably Doctor Strange. In terms of, growing up, I was never really that into like the magic side of the Marvel, Marvel comics and that sort of thing. So, I don't think that I ever even really bought a Doctor Strange comic. My entire exposure to Doctor Strange was when he would show up in stories and books that I was otherwise reading. But despite that, I think that the movie did a really good job with making the character interesting. I thought that Benedict Cumbersnop did a fantastic job with the role, and it made me more interested in Doctor Strange. But I still wouldn't put him up there with Captain America or Peter Quill. Okay, moving on to another not so straightforward question. Sean asks, if one other game franchise could double down on what Breath of the Wild is doing in terms of puzzles, vast open world, discovery, etc., which one would you like to see do it right? Now again, at face value, that seems like a very simple question, because Breath of the Wild is amazing, and so you would think it would be simple to just say like, oh, I want like a Star Wars version or whatever. But you have to kind of look at, there are a lot of very specific things that came together in sort of a very specific way that made Breath of the Wild work the way it does, because it's not just an open world game. There are a lot of open world games out there, but I think what Breath of the Wild does differently is a combination of sort of taking hands off the approach to, you come out of the resurrection chamber, and it kind of nudges you in one direction and says, hey, go do these couple things real quick. And that functions as sort of a basic tutorial setup. and then it's just like out into the world you go. And you have a general idea of the things you're supposed to be doing. Defeat Ganon. But it's not kind of beating you over the head with like, you need to go this way, and you're on this very specific quest that has to be done in this very specific order. A lot of open world games, they tend to feel like they're linear games just surrounding you with a lot of space. Like, for instance, you know, they want you to go from point A to point B, but while you go from point A to point B, you're surrounded by a ton of open space, you know, so you can go, you know, back and forth while you get there, but it's just open space. Whereas Breath of the Wild feels like it gives you this open space, and all of that is gameplay. You know, everything in there is stuff to do, and in any order that you feel like doing it. It has the topographical, you know, geography to facilitate that, and that's an important part of it, I think, because those two things work together in a very unique way that wouldn't necessarily apply to a lot of games. For instance, you know, I could say like, oh, I want a great open world Game of Thrones game, but at the same time, you can't, like, I can't picture Sandor Clegane like climbing a mountain like Link does, and I especially can't picture him or anybody in the Game of Thrones setting then sort of like paragliding off of that mountain and floating down to the forest below, you know. So the way in which Link traverses his world plays a lot into, you know, the joy of exploring and that sort of thing. And a lot of Breath of the Wild is about that, like climbing and that sort of thing. Anytime you see a mountain in Breath of the Wild, you think to yourself, there's something up there. There's got to be something up there. Or at the very least, I need to get up there because it'll give me the best vantage point to see everything else that I could go do. And so I feel franchises that could take advantage of that same sort of thing are probably fairly limited. Like, for instance, to do a similar thing with Star Wars, you would have to set up some very specific parameters, you know, to restrict all of the other things you would expect yourself to be able to do in Star Wars. Like, in a fantasy setting like Legend of Zelda, it makes sense that one of your only methods of transportation is a horse, and, you know, you can find a wild horse out and about and tame it. But if you did a sci-fi setting like Star Wars, you would have to come up with a specific reason why your character couldn't just get a starship and fly where he needs to go, which cuts out a lot of that, you know, that land traversal and that exploration that happens from thinking, I'm going to go from here to there, and then finding 10 different things along the way to distract you and, you know, pull your interest off in different directions. So it's kind of tough to imagine simply skinning Breath of the Wild with a different game franchise when so many things that Breath of the Wild does feel very uniquely suited to, you know, to not only The Legend of Zelda, but, you know, this sort of more whimsical take on things, you know, that slightly cartoony, slightly upbeat. You know, it sort of rules out a lot of the more serious franchises and makes it very difficult to kind of picture a different game playing like Breath of the Wild does. So I guess my answer to the question, you know, which franchise would I like to see do what Breath of the Wild is doing, would really come down to, you know, a game, like a franchise that already does open world as its sort of main shtick. So by example, Fallout or Elder Scrolls. So I think what I would like to see, you know, those franchises learn from Breath of the Wild would be, first and foremost, maybe a little bit more hands-off. And second, and this is something that I feel, you know, games like Fallout and Elder Scrolls would really benefit from, is, you know, being freer with traversal and travel of the environment. Like, for instance, in Fallout, if you see a rock or a mountain, the only way you can get on top of it is jumping, is hoping you can find ledges and flat spaces and using the geometry to try and kind of like work your way up it. There's no actual climbing in those games, and I think that that's necessary. I think that Breath of the Wild has shown us how much that can add to a game, you know. And so, whereas Breath of the Wild gets away with just saying like, okay, Link has a stamina meter and he can climb anything with just his bare hands, you know, a slightly more serious approach, in a game like Fallout or Elder Scrolls might require us actually using climbing equipment. Being able to, not only traverse our environment, but giving us reasons to, putting interesting things to find up in high places and that sort of thing. More puzzles, more treasure chests, more mini dungeons, all that sort of stuff is I think the biggest lesson that open world games can take away. It's not enough to just give us a lot of space to travel. You have to put stuff in that space that makes us want to explore every inch of it. All right, finally this month we have a question from Dean. This one's actually fairly simple to answer. Okay, so Dean says, what game would you love to play that does not currently exist? For example, mine would be a Gorka Morka game with Mordheim gameplay and Dwarf Fortress levels of complexity. I would love to see a game like either Star Citizen or even like Coder, Like, I would love to see Knights of the Old Republic done again. Like, I would love to see BioWare. Well, I would love to see BioWare do KOTOR, but not if they're going to do it like they did Mass Effect Andromeda, which I feel it was like phoned in. Or you know what? I would love to see KOTOR done like The Witcher, which I haven't even played. I haven't even played any of the Witcher games, but I've seen enough footage to know that The Witcher and their approach on characters and animation and just natural conversation scenes blows away what BioWare did with Mass Effect Andromeda. So that's one thing I'd like to see. I would love to see, a new Star Wars RPG done in the style of The Witcher, or done by the guys that did The Witcher. I would love to see Star Citizen except in the Firefly universe. Or even, again, a big RPG like KOTOR in the Firefly universe. I would love to see a game like State of Decay, but combined with a battle royale mechanic where, you take this big open space filled with zombies and all sorts of other stuff you can build and that sort of thing. You start a match and there's only 8 people in it or something like that, and you have to and whoever can survive the longest. I would love to see some sort of like match-based Battlestar Galactica game where you function as the crew of the Galactica in the middle of some sort of crisis, and each and it could be like different maps or different crises, like you're on the ship and the Cylons have attacked and whatever, and as a group you have to overcome, you have to each with a specific job to do, you have to fend off the Cylon attack or whatever. But the catch is, one person is randomly secretly assigned to be a Cylon, and it could be anybody and you don't know who it is, and this person, when they're in the game, they are given a secret objective to sabotage. And so so everybody is kind of like forced to work together to overcome something, and yet naturally suspicious of anything anybody else is doing. Basically, I would love to see the Battlestar Galactica board game brought into some sort of really cool video game situation. I could go on and on because this is easy. This one is coming up with ideas for games that I have no responsibility to actually design. Give me a game based on Netflix's Voltron, where 5 people are put into a match. Each of you controls a lion, and you have to fight the forces of Zarkon, and you can together form Voltron, but then you each individually have to control a leg or an arm or whatever, and somehow defeat like the main big bad. Like, I think that would be hilarious. Anyway, that's it for this month. I appreciate the question, guys. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, to chat with you and kind of answer some of your questions and that sort of thing. So, again, thank you all, for your support for the month of March. Your continued patronage means so much to me. We'll see you for next month's Q&A. Have a good one.